Hello, can you hear me? Hello, good evening, everyone.
Good evening, Bona.
All right. Yeah, I hope we're fine.
Yeah.
Good. So yesterday, we had a section that covers the background. We had a session that covered the background of software testing, right? So there we got to know what testing is all about, right? We went through different scenarios. So what I'm doing is sort of a recap of what we did yesterday. Okay. So just to refresh our mind, right, of what we did yesterday. Joshua, can you mute yourself, please? Yes, thank you. So just to refresh our mind on what we did yesterday, right? So we went through different scenarios of testing, right? We went through different scenarios of testing, and then we also went through different roles of testing. So we did after we've gone through different scenarios of testing, we also did discuss why testing is important, and then we went through the general principle of testing, right? So after that, we'll discuss about different roles of software testing, and then we also went into what defect is, what failure is, what error is, right? And then we'll discuss the relationship between error, defect, and failure. Then after that, we also discuss about when do we stop testing, and then general principle of testing, right? So we also talk about fundamental testing process yesterday. So today we'll also, build on that. So what we have today is software development lifecycle and software testing lifecycle. So the software development lifecycle is you can call it SDLC. The SDLC stands for software development lifecycle, and the STLC stands for software testing lifecycle. So today we'll be looking at what software development lifecycle is and what software testing lifecycle is, because they're important you understand what these two things are and the relationship that they have, right? So today, what we'll be covering is, like I said before, what software development lifecycle is, SDLC, right? Then the second one we'll have is the significance of software development lifecycle in software development. So here we'll be looking at what the significance of software development lifecycle is in software development. We'll look at different phases of software development lifecycle, SDLC. We'll also look at software development models, right? So after that, we'll now dive into software testing lifecycle, STLC. We'll look at the phase of software testing lifecycle. We'll look at the relationship between software development lifecycle and software testing lifecycle, STLC, right? And then we'll dive into question and answer. So it is a very important topic today. And raise your hand if you have any question at any point. If you don't understand, whatever I've said, feel free to let me know, right? So that I can clarify that. And yeah, at some point, I know we'll have a lot to cover today, but yeah, we'll take it one after the other, and then we'll take it slowly as well. So let's dive straight into it. What is software development lifecycle, right? So software development lifecycle, SDLC, is a systematic process used by software developers to design, develop, test, and deploy software application, right? So they use this process to design, develop, test, and deploy software applications to the users. So software developing lifecycle aim to produce high quality softwares that meet or exceed. You can remember yesterday we were talking about testing. Well, we were saying that you need to test a particular product or a particular software to ensure that it meets users' needs or it meets users' expectation. We took an example of a car when you have an when you have when you are going to buy a car, you have an expectation. You are the user, you are the owner, or you're going to be the owner of the car. So you have an expectation, and you want to ensure that that car has met your expectation, right? So in this case, the aim of SDLC is to ensure, right, or to aim that the software we're producing is of high quality and that it meets or exceeds customers' expectation. And they also want to make sure they ensure that it is delivered on time and within budget. So let's say you are developing a software, right? You have had a budget that you want to, let's say you want to spend or you want to use, you budgeted a certain amount of money for that software. You have your expectation, right? And you have a time that you want that software to be ready. So what SDLC helps us to do is to ensure that when all this application is being designed, go through the design phase, right? It goes through the development phase, it goes through the testing phase, and at the end of the day, this software will be, produced, right, and deployed, and then it will meet your expectation and stay within your budget and the time frame that you want it. That's what SDLC helps, us to do, and it also ensures that this software is maintainable and scalable. So that is what the software development lifecycle helps us to do during software development, right? So now we'll move into the significance of software development lifecycle, right? So, excuse me. So we'll move into the significance of software development lifecycle. Software development lifecycle is highly significant in software development for several reasons. And those reasons are what you can see outlined here. So we'll have the structural approach. It provides the structural approach. We'll have the quality assurance, customer satisfaction, and project control and monitoring. You can see all these things is in line with what we said that software development lifecycle is all about. So let's look at them one after the other and see how they are actually significant to software development, right? So the first one is structured approach. Software development lifecycle provides a systematic and structured approach to software development. They ensure that everything is structured, right from the requirements recitation down to the design phase, down to the build and development phase, down to the testing phase, right? Down to the deployment phase. They ensure that it follows that approach, it follows that system approach, right? Or that process until that software is deployed, even up to the maintenance. Because after building a software, you don't just say, oh yeah, I'm done. That software needs maintenance, right? Sometimes there are certain features you want to enhance, right? It still follows that same process. You want to add certain feature, you want to edit certain things, you want to remove it. That is the maintenance part of it, right? So that is what SDLC helps us to do, right? It ensures a structured approach during software manufacturing or software development. So the second one is quality assurance. So the testing phase, when you talk about quality assurance, you're talking about testing, right? We went through this yesterday. I hope this resonates with you when I say quality assurance. Testing comes in, right? So the testing phase in SDLC, such as the kind of testing that we do, such as unit testing, integration testing. Don't worry, we'll come into what unit testing is. We'll come into integration testing. Is everything we are mentioning will come into what all of them is, right? But just to let you know, you can see some of the words that we used yesterday. We're also repeating them today because they are interwoven. We use it everywhere, right? So I was mentioning the kind of testing we do in every software development lifecycle phase, right? I've mentioned unit testing, integration testing, system testing. Ensure that the software is thoroughly evaluated for quality and functionality. This contributes to the production of high quality software with fewer defects. Yesterday, I was telling you that it's impossible, almost impossible to say that this particular software has got no defects. This particular software has got no bugs. That is not true, right? That is not true. There could be bug somewhere. But what is important is, do you have fewer bugs? What are the risks associated with those bugs? So when there's no risk or the risk is low, it's not affecting anything, it's not a blocker, then you can say, oh, that's fine. Well, I think we are good. We can take it, right? So this is what software development lifecycle is. The significance of it is that it ensures quality, right? Then the third one is customer satisfaction. If you're going back to the definition I gave you about what software development lifecycle is, it ensures that that software has met customers' expectation. And when it meets customers' expectation, they are satisfied. So SDLC involves, as you know, we'll come to each of them, gathering and analyzing customers' requirements at early stages. Let's say you want to produce a software and you've met a team or a software consulting company that uses this SDLC, and then they work in an agile, they could be working in waterfall, depending on what methodology, software development methodology they want to adopt. Right. So the first thing they do is the business analyst or the product owner come to you and ask you, what do you want to be on this website? Right? When you are giving it to them, when you are telling them you want the logo, this is the color you want, these are the things you want on your header, you want your form to be this way, you want your address to appear here, you want your number, they are jotting it down, they are putting it where you want them to put. What they are doing is they are gathering your requirement and they are analyzing it. They will say, oh, okay, where do you want your number to be? If your number is in this certain location, customers can easily see it and call you for business, right? These are requirement gathering. That is the first step in SDLC. We'll come into the step and you'll see what I'm saying, right? So once that is being done, right, they gather your requirement, they gather the requirement at that early stage, right, by incorporating customers' feedback throughout development lifecycle. So as you know, for a customer to be satisfied, right, when you are showing the customer what you are doing, you are analyzing the requirement, the customer is giving you feedback. Customer in this point is the person that owns the software, right? That person is giving you feedback. He's telling you, no, this is not where I want it to be. This is where you want it, he or she wants it to be. There is feedback, right? And that helps in ensuring that customer is satisfied, right? Then SDLC helps to ensure that the final product align with customers' expectation and increase overall satisfaction. At the end of the day, the owner of the website and the customers are satisfied. Let's say the end user have gone to the website, they will easily navigate around the website. They can easily find number, they can easily find where the address is, they can easily find about the organization and what they do. This helps the customer and ensure, and the owner of the company will be as well happy, right? Because he's doing business. So the next one is project control and monitoring. SDLC provide mechanism for monitoring and controlling the process of the project and the progress of the project as well. So in this instance, the project managers can use this control to track the development milestone. So this control, they will use it, this SDLC, they will know when and at what stage the software development is at. They will know, oh, okay, yeah, we've gone through the requirements processes, we've gone through the design processes, we are in the development process. So the project owner will say, oh yeah, when the owner calls, yeah, okay, what's going on with they'll say, oh yeah, we've gone through this, we've gone through that, we are at this stage. Or social feature is at this stage, because sometimes it doesn't involve building a whole new application or software all over again. It could involve enhancing that particular software. It could involve building a particular feature. Let's say in your software website, right? For example, you do not have registration, right? Because at that point, you don't have any reason for customers to come and register because of the kind of business you're doing. But at some point, you might have a look and say, okay, fine, we want our users to actually register so that we'll know whom our customers are. And you want to build a feature into your website, right, where customers can come in or users can come in and register, right? So during that building or enhancement of that website, you are bringing developers, you are bringing testers, right? They develop it, they design, they gather requirement, they want to know all the field you want to be on there, right? They analyze it, they design it, they develop it, they test it, and they deploy it. So that is what that phase is all about. So apart from the ones I have here, there are other significant of SDLC, which can include risk management, right? So software development lifecycle includes phases for planning and risk assessment, right? So at this point, you plan what you want to build, and then you carry out risk assessment to ensure that, okay, if we add this particular feature, is it going to affect anyone, right? What are the risks? Would this process or this feature that we're adding, drive our customers away? Would it prevent the customer to actually, because there are some certain features that you will build on your website, and when user comes to it and they will be, oh no, we don't want to put our details in there, right? So it helps to plan and assess the risk, right? This allows to identify and mitigate any potential risk early in the development lifecycle, and as well as reducing the likelihood of project failure or delays. Right? Let's say they have built that particular website and then they realize that, oh no, this particular feature we've incorporated into our system or into this software is not good for the business, right? They will have to remove it, and then, but so doing, causing delay, right? So that is because the reason why that delay will come is because they haven't carried out risk assessment and know the risk involved with adding that particular feature, right? The next one is effective communication, right? It helps to clear, the line of communication between the project stakeholders, which include the developers, the testers, project managers, and the customers, right? So SDLC emphasizes the creation of documentation at each stage, right? These documentation serve as a valuable resources for future maintenance. That's why we're encouraging everyone go on the wiki, document things, because when you start working as a tester, most of the things you do, you will document it. The reason why you document it is, let's say you bring in an additional tester, right? How would they know what you've been doing, how you've been writing your test case, how you've been where you've been storing your test data? It's through the documentation, right? That's why it's important when you join a company, ask, where are your documentation? That documentation will help you and guide you on what that tester has been doing, what the team are up to, and what they are doing. Then you can easily fit into what they are doing, right? So yeah, that's it. We'll go to the next stage. So in this next stage, right? So we will talk about the phases of SDLC, right? So I've been talking about the significant, and you can see when I was talking about the significant, I've mentioned virtually all the stages, right? And then you can see on the slide the stages of software development lifecycle. But before I go on the stages, I want to also emphasize that the stages, right? This software development lifecycle, I'm trying to reiterate what I've said. It's very, very, very important in software development lifecycle. They are important. So now going to the phases of software development lifecycle, you can see the first phase is requirements phases. So this is where the BA gather requirements, right? After the gathering of the requirement, the next one is design phase. So they will start designing, producing mockups, and the design. I mentioned UI UX yesterday. So this is where they do the design, just to show exactly how that software will look like at the end of development, right? So after the design phase, the next phase is build and development phase. This is where they start developing, the developers start writing their codes, right? So after the code or the development process, then the next stage is testing. So you can see you sit quite well, very close to the developer, in software development lifecycle. So the people that they do this requirement gathering is either the product owner, which is a PO, or the business analyst. The design phase, the web designers can do this, and the UI UX designers can do this as well. The BA can also produce a mock-up, right, for the design phase. As you know, the development phase, the developers. So the testing phase, who does the testing phase? That is where we'll come in. So we'll do the quality and assurance, we'll test all the products. And after we've tested it, if during the testing you feel like this application has not met the requirement, you have the right to say no. You have the right to say no. So as you can see, you have the right, this is a testing place, this is a testing stage. You have the right to say no, that this software hasn't met the requirements, right? So after the testing stage, what is the next stage? Deployment or delivery phase, right? After testing, it got deployed, and after that, maintenance, and then it goes through the life cycle over and over again, right? So that is the phase for the software development lifecycle. Don't worry, we'll go into each of them one after the other, and then we'll expatiate on it, right? So we're going to the next slide. Yes, like I said, we'll be going into each of them one after the other, right? So in a nutshell, I've told you that this is a point that requirement is being gathered, right? So what we have here is that the requirement analysis, right, or requirement gathering is a crucial phase in software development lifecycle, SDLC, right? Where the focus is on gathering, right, documenting and understanding the needs and constraint of the end user and stakeholders. The BA goes in with the stakeholder or the owner of the owner of the software, and then gather the requirements. As he's gathering the requirement, he's also documenting it and understanding the needs, right? What the end user doesn't want, what he feels will be a problem, right? Those are the constraints. And after that, he will gather all these requirements, document it, analyze it, right? And then it moves to the next stage. What are the objectives? What are the objectives? So the objectives here is gathering and defining software requirements, right? They go in, they gather requirements, and they also, they gather the requirements and they document it, right? And then what are the activity? Here, as you can see, we'll have the objective, we'll have the activity. Communicate with stakeholder. That's what the BA does. Communicate, or the PO, communicate with stakeholder, document functional and non-functional requirements, and create a requirement specification document. So they go in, they communicate with the stakeholder or whoever that owns the product, right? They document it, both the functional and the non-functional requirements, create the requirements, and then create the requirements specification document. That is what they will now use to create the user story, the acceptance criteria. And sometimes when you are testing, they give you all these documents so that you cross-check it with what the developer has actually built, right? And then you as a tester will have the opportunity to question some of these requirements that they've documented that doesn't make sense or that you don't understand. You have the right to do that, right? So the next stage, like I said, can someone mention the next stage so that I know that you are all following? The first phase is requirement gathering. Can someone mention the next stage? I've mentioned it. Joshua, can you mention the next stage for me?
Yeah, the objective and the activities.
No, what I mean is after requirement gathering, the next stage after requirement gathering in software development lifecycle.
Okay, 1 minute. After the
Requirement.
next stage is I think is the design phase.
Absolutely. The next stage is design phase. So get ready. I will go back to the slide and show you one more time and go through the process because I'll be calling you out one after the other. So tell me what the next stage is. So as you can see, the first stage is requirements phase. The second stage is design phase. The third stage is build and development stage. Then we'll have testing, deployment or delivery phase, and then maintenance, right? So you need to know all these phases. So like I said before, we're taking it one after the other. So now we've discussed what the requirement stage is. We're going into the design stage, design stage. So the design stage or the design phase in the software development lifecycle is where the software architectures and the system design are developed based on the requirements during the previous phase, which is during the requirements phase. So as you can see, the first stage start with the product owner meeting or a meeting with the owner of the software. Let's say, Blessing, you want to develop a software, right? So you've gone to a software consulting company, right? And you've asked them, okay, I want you to build me this particular software. The business owner will come to you. Yeah, what are the things? They have their questions, they state the requirements. So when you have told them all this, then the BA will document it. And then we'll pass it. Then that is the first stage, right? It goes to the second stage where they will actually design it. And they are designing it based on what you has given the business analyst during the requirement gathering. Right? So in this phase, they design the architecture, they design whatever button or whatever functionality or whatever field that you want it to be. And they're doing all this design based on the requirements you've given them. And what is the objective? The objective is to create a blueprint for the software based on the requirements. Right? They create a blueprint, and that is the blueprint that we're working on. Right? And then the activity, as you know, will develop high-level architecture or architectural design based on the requirement, right? They will create a design specification for each component, which is a lower design, and then define data structures, algorithm, and interface. This is where they will say, okay, these are the kind of data that we want, to go in here. These are how we want the system to communicate. This is how we want the interface to look like. We want a side panel. And we want the header to be in a specific place. So these are the stages that they do all those things. So after they have designed all these things, right, what they do is that they go back to the stakeholder, and the stakeholder will have to review the design. So sometimes the stakeholder will say, no, this actually don't look good. How about if you flip it and put it on the other way, on the other place, right? So now they will be able to do that. They will change it. And then at the end of the day, when the stakeholder is happy, what happens? They can now move into the next phase. And the next phase I would mention, Chide, do you want to tell us what the next stage is?
The next stage is build development.
Absolutely. That's correct. So the next stage is
build development phase.
I've just muted Vicent. So yeah, Chide, well done. Thank you for that. That is correct. I'm going to meet you. So that is correct. So the next stage is build and development. Like I say, this is where actual coding and construction. When I talk about construction, I'm not talking about the physical building construction. This is where the developers start writing the codes, right, and constructing the website, right, or the software. It doesn't have to be a website. It could be a mobile application. It could be a tool. It could be any kind of software, right? So they now write the codes based on the requirements and the design. So yesterday I was talking to you about where error can occur. So I was telling you that error can occur at the requirements phase, the design phase. So like I was saying, yes, I told you yesterday that the developer can just focus on the design alone, right, and do the development. And then if the design is not correct, right, the developer would the code that the developer has written or what the developer has built will be incorrect as well, right? So, but the developer has to ensure that the code that they are writing or whatever they are developing is in line with what is on the requirements as well as what is in line with the design, right? So the objective is to actually write the actual source code for the software. When we talk about source code, is the code, right, that is behind whatever interface you are seeing. That is just the objective here, right? So the activity is the developer implement the design specification using a choosing programming language. So there are different programming language that they use. They can use the C#, they can use Python, they can use Java, they can use any programming language, right? So, and they do this following coding standard and guideline established during the planning and the design phase, right? So this is all about the development and the build phase. So we'll go to the next phase. Casey, you want to tell me what the next phase is? Casey, are you there? Okay. Blessing, I'll come to you. The next phase, please.
The next phase is a testing phase.
That's right. Thank you so much, Blessing. The next phase is the testing phase, where this is where we're coming, right? Testing.
Sorry, I'm here. I was trying to,
All right. Okay, that's fine. Get ready. I will call you. Yes, so the next phase is testing phase. Thank you, Blessing. That is correct. So the testing phase involves the systematic evaluating of the software products to ensure its quality, functionality, and reliability. We've mentioned this over and over again, that when you are testing, you want to ensure you are following a systematic approach to evaluate a software product to ensure its quality, the functionality, and reliability, right? And the objective here is write the actual source code for the system, right? So now do not get that objective wrong, right? So because when you are writing, sometimes you are writing an automated test, you use a certain programming language and framework to actually test that particular software, right? Sometimes you do it manually. We discussed that yesterday. So sometimes you are using, some of the elements when you are doing automation, you are using some of the elements on that particular software, right, to actually automate the website so that when you run it, you go perform the same activity you would have performed during testing it manually, right? And the activity here is conduct different type of testing, such as I've mentioned it, unit testing. We'll come into all these types of testing in great detail later. Well, you do integration testing, you do user acceptance testing, which is UAT. And there are so many other testing you can mention about smoke testing, sanity testing. We'll come into all those things, right? And you do that to validate different aspects of the software to ensure the quality, functionality, and reliability of that particular software, right? So this is our area, right? This is where we'll stand. This is where we'll work or where we'll fall into as a tester, right? The next phase, Casey, are you ready? After testing, what happens next? Casey, are you ready? After testing, what happens next? Okay, Casey's not ready. Yes, so I will go over to the next slide. After testing, what happens next?
Deployment.
Good. Well done. Deployment. So once the application is tested, it get deployed, right? Or get delivered. So this is the phase which involves making the software product available for user. This is for the external user, those people that will use the product, which is what happens to be our customers, right? So you deploy it. That is when we say the application has gone live. So the Facebook, you see all the website, different application goes through this process. We do not see some testers, some people are seeing it already before even the external people start seeing it, right? Because they've been working on it, the testers and everyone who is involved in the software development lifecycle, right? So, but once it has gone through the testing stage, they have ensured that this application is working well. That is when it get deployed, right? And then the end user will start seeing it. So this phase focus on the actual release and distribution of the software after successfully completed the development lifecycle, right? So that means it has gone through development, it has gone through testing and validation phase. Then it can now be deployed. And then the last stage, Vincent, are you ready? The last stage is, okay, we'll move on. The last stage is the maintenance stage, right? So on this maintenance stage, it's an ongoing, enhancement, an ongoing support, trying to optimize the system to make it work more effectively after that system. Because when it has gone live, it needs maintenance as well, right? So in this phase, we ensure that the software remains functional, because sometimes it can go live and when users start using it, it's start becoming slow. Some of the functionality becomes hard to click, some of the button becomes hard to click, it's not functional as expected. That is why we have the maintenance there. So that is where we ensure that it remains functional, it remains secure, it's not broken, right? And they align with ever-evolving requirements and technology. Because sometimes when it must have gone live, some of the, the owner might say, no, I think I want this enhanced. That is where it all come true, right? So now we've gone through the software development life cycle. We've gone through all the software development life cycle. We've gone through them one after the other, and I'm sure that you quite understood this. So moving on, we'll be talking about different models, right? In as much as they have phases. So I don't want you to get confused. So we'll have software development lifecycle. We've gone through what the software development lifecycle is. So we've done the significance of software development lifecycle, right? And we've gone through different phases of software development lifecycle. So where we have different phases of software development lifecycle, we also have different models in software development lifecycle. And that is what we're going to go next. Next is software development lifecycle models, right? So here we'll have three here that we mentioned here. We'll have more, but these are the three most important ones. We'll have the waterfall or the linear model, right? Waterfall or the linear model, right? We'll come into it in great detail, right? So the second one we'll have is the V model, sequential development model. And then the third one is the iterative incremental model. Take note of it. Waterfall, right? Waterfall, which is linear, right? It's waterfall, you can call it linear model. The next one is V model, which is a sequential development model. Then the next one is iterative incremental model. So we'll take them one after the other. So the first one will go into the first one that I've mentioned, which is the waterfall, right? So now, as you can see on the diagram on your right-hand side, you can see the way it is dropping, right? You have the requirements, right? You have the design, the development, testing, deploy, and maintenance. So it is, falling from once all the, so what this one does is that it follows a linear and sequential approach where each phase must be completed before moving to the next stage. So it's in form of a waterfall, right? So now, before this stage, before we move to the design stage, all the requirements must have been gathered. You get what I'm saying? All the requirements must have been gathered. So the BA or the product owner who is gathering the requirement must have gathered all the requirements that will be enough and documented all the requirements that will use to build that particular software from beginning to end, from the website logo up until the last point. Let's take an e-commerce, for example. It will capture both the header, the logo, the landing page, the footer, capture all the login, the registration, the product side of things, all the landing pages that will be on that website. It will capture everything up until the checkout and everything. So the business analyst will gather everything before they go to the design stage. So when we get to the design stage, the UI/UX or the web designers, those who will design the web, will design every bit of the website, right? Before it goes to the development process, the development stage. So when it comes to the development stage, the developer would have written all the code from beginning to the end, must have developed the actual, testing, not the test, must have developed the actual website, right? Then before it comes to software testing. So when you get to testing, you as a tester, what this model is talking about is that you will now start testing all the websites, right? You have to test the header, the logo, the banner, the registration, the login, the checkout, the, everything, all the products, every aspect of that website. You have to test everything. Then it goes to deployment. Everything get deployed. Then before maintenance starts. So it's waterfall is going from one stage to another. So before we go to the next stage, which is the design, the requirement must have been completed. Before we go to development, the design stage must be completed. Before we go to the testing stage, the development stage must be completed. So it follows that approach. It follows that approach, and it keeps on. That is why it's adapted to the waterfall. Right? So waterfall, let's say you have a send and the rain, your roof. So the water goes from the top, and then when it's raining, so it goes from the top and then it's falling until it gets to the last, and then it falls down. That's what this approach is. And it has advantage and it has its disadvantage, right? So its advantage, one is that a clear structure and easy to understand. Of course, when we go to other ones like the view model and then the iterative incremental, you will realize that the view model is actually, clear and easy to understand. So you know that we'll finish one stage before we go into the other stage. We'll finish the requirement stage before we go into the development, the design stage. We'll finish the design stage before you go into the development stage. So everything, I know why I'm emphasizing on everything, right? So everything that has to do with requirement gathering must be completed before you move to the design stage. Everything that has to do with design stage must be completed before you move to the development stage. Everything that has to do with development must be completed before you go to the testing stage. Everything that has to do with testing must be completed before you deploy, and then maintenance, right? When we go into other ones, you now begin to understand why I am emphasizing on everything, right? So now we'll go to the advantage, right? I've said that it's clear, it has a clear structure and it's easy to understand, right? So the next one is that well suited for small to medium sized projects, right? So when you have a medium size or a small project, waterfall is very good. Because when you have a very large and complicated project, right? When you have a complex project, right? So and you want to follow this model, it becomes very difficult and inefficient. Whereby, because the project is complex, you won't understand all the requirements at that initial stage. So, and what will happen is that you will realize that you must have spent a lot of time gathering requirements, right? You've gone to the design stage and you've gone to the development stage. When it comes to testing, when certain things do not add up, because obviously it's complex, you have to go back again to the deployment, and then not to the deployment, to the requirements, right? And then what is going to happen? You at the end of the day, you would deploy a website that hasn't met customers' expectation, right? So well suited for medium or small size projects with stable and well-defined requirements. Because when it's complex, sometimes the requirements are not clear ab initio, and it becomes difficult to use waterfall model. So the disadvantage is it lacks the lack of flexibility to accommodate change after the project has started, right? So let's say because of how the model is, you finish one, you go over to the other one, you go over to the other one until you finish, right? Until you develop and then maintenance, right? So let's say we are at the development stage and the owner of the project says, oh, I think I don't like a particular feature, we want another feature, right? You can add it because you have to go to the next stage. You have to go to the next stage. You have to go to the next stage, right? Until you are done. So it doesn't accommodate any change. So that is why if you want to use view model, it should be a small project and all the requirements should be well defined and understood, and it has to make sense before starting, right? So the next one is late detection of issue due to testing being performed after development, right? So because all the testing doesn't happen at any stage, any of this stage, right? Testing doesn't happen at any of this stage, doesn't happen at any of this stage. It happens after all the software has been built. That is when the testing starts. So this, when the testing is ongoing here and you detect any defect or any bug, it becomes late, right? Unlike other model where you start your testing at very early stage. So these are the disadvantage of V model. So the next one we'll have is the disadvantage of waterfall. So this is waterfall, by the way. So the next one we'll have is the V model. So we're going to go to the V model, right? So the V model, as you can see, the other one is waterfall, and you can see it's falling from one stages phase to another. Well, this one is the V model. So you can see the diagram. It has it's in form or illustrated in the form of a V shape. You can see the V, right? So what is this stage all about, right? This model all about, right? So it's an extensive, an extension of waterfall model, right? It's not waterfall, but it's an extension of waterfall model where testing is integrated into each phase of development, right? As you can see, as you know, with waterfall model, there's no testing at any stage. There's actually no testing at any stage, right? The development requirement gathering will be completed before we go to the design model. Design model will be completed. We go to development. The development will be completed before testing. But on this phase, right, at any stage, you have testing. You have to test at every stage, right? So let this not confuse you. It's very easy. So you can see user requirements, which is a requirement gathering, right? So you have software requirements, they are still the same. So the next one, you have high level design. Then the next one is detailed design. So you have high level detailed design, but they're all design. So this is a requirement, this is the design, these two are the design. So they are, in this case, like I said before, you could have high level, and then during a design, you could high level and then detailed design, right? So after that, you now have the coding, right? Coding will now come in. That is where the developer will start building it. So at every stage, right, starting from the requirement, you have testing, right? So during the requirement, you have acceptance testing, right? You have, like, can you see here? You have acceptance testing during the requirement, which is also this one. When you are the software requirement, you also have another testing. And what kind of testing that you have? What kind of testing you have? You have acceptance, you design an acceptance testing design, right? So during software requirements, we now do another testing, which is system test design, and that the kind of testing we'll be doing is system design. Don't forget, I mentioned before that we'll do unit testing, we'll do integration testing, we'll do unit testing, and we'll do acceptance testing. So let it not confuse you, right? I said before, you do unit testing. So for you to understand this diagram, you can see here. So the first one is user requirement, which is the first stage, requirement gathering. The second stage, so we'll have two requirement gathering, user requirement and software requirement, right? We'll have high level design and we'll have detailed design, still design, then we'll have code, and we'll now have testing. But in this model, right, every stage has its own testing. So during user requirement, we'll have acceptance testing. And you as a tester will design an acceptance test, will create an acceptance test design, right? Where you want to, you want to ensure that the user requirements make sense, you understood it, right? They're in line with what the stakeholders want, right? The same with the system, you want to ensure that the overall system makes sense, right? That's why you do system testing. So you have the design, you have integration testing, right? And then integration test design, you have integration testing, right? So you also have another one, detailed design, which is every unit, you're now designing every small unit, and you have unit testing, unit test design, and you have unit testing, then code, right? Then code, the developer will write the code. So that is how it follows. It comes down here and then it goes up, right? But they interact at every level, right? I hope this makes sense. So it has its advantage and its disadvantage. Don't forget, if you have any question, raise your hand. If you think you don't understand it, raise your hand. I will pause and answer your question. Right? So it has its advantage and its disadvantage. And one of the advantages is early detection of defect due to parallel testing. As you can see, at every stage, you have a testing that is parallel to it, right? At every stage, you have a testing, right? So let's say the requirement doesn't make sense. When you are testing it, user requirement, you will dictate an error or a bug and say, oh no, this doesn't make sense. What is going on here, right? So you dictate the error as early as possible, right? It's well organized and easy to manage. As you can see, at every stage, you are doing testing. At every stage, you are doing testing. So it's easy to manage, right? The disadvantage can be rigid and may not handle changes well, right? Because at every stage, let's say at the requirement stage, you have done the testing. At development stage, at design stage, you have done another testing. It becomes a bit difficult to handle changes, right? Because if any changes come in, right, you've gone past that stage, right? So it's difficult, right, to handle that change. So the next one is disadvantage is testing can be time consuming because you test all the time at every stage. You test, so it can be time consuming, right? So that is also a disadvantage when it comes to the V model. So the next one I mentioned is iterative and incremental model. That is the next one we'll be going into, right? Iterative and incremental model. So pay attention because it can be a bit confusing here, right? But don't worry, with time you would understand this particular one, because the iterative or an incremental model, iterative incremental, not or iterative incremental model is the agile, which is the one that we'll be practicing, the one that we'll be using to develop our software, right? You will see the reason why we've adapted this one. Like I said before, when it comes to waterfall, just a quick recap. So the first one we've mentioned 3 different models. The first one is waterfall, which is linear, the V model, and then the iterative incremental model, which is agile, right? So we mentioned that the first one, right, which is the waterfall, every stage must be completed before we go over to the next stage. So the requirements must be completed before we go to the design. Design must be completed before we go to the development. Development must be completed before we go over to testing, right? Whereas with V model, at every stage, we have testing associated to it. At every stage, you have testing associated to it. The requirement stage have testing associated to it. The design stage has another testing associated to it, right? Then we are now talking about iterative incremental model, agile. So let's dive into it. Iterative incremental model is an approach to software development where the processes is divided into small, manageable cycle or iteration, right? Each iteration passes through the phase of requirement, design, code, testing, deployment, right? Then it goes back again. So let me analyze it using this diagram we have right now. So what this model does is, when you have a very large or a very complicated project, right? You have a complicated project. So what you do, let's say we want to build a website, right? So what the V model does is, the business owner, right, the business analyst will go and gather all the requirements, right? Gather all the requirements before it goes to the design. But with V model, it's not like that. The business analyst doesn't need to gather all the requirements, right? What the business analyst does is, he look at what the owner wants to build a website, right? So he will now go and say, okay, in this iteration, that's why it's called iterative incremental. In this iteration, we want to go over, like, as you know, we're in this sprint 0, which is iteration 0, right? So we're not doing any development. We'll start development from iteration 1. So he wants, in this iteration, which is iteration 1, we want to cover the header only. So the business analyst will only gather requirements for the header, right? So because the business analyst is focusing on the header, he will be more detailed. He will ask questions. He will ensure that that header, just the header, right, that everything that the owner or the stakeholder wants, it's being documented, right? So now the next stage, that only that header will now go through all the phases of software development lifecycle. The header alone will go through the requirements when it must have been gathered. The header, they will design the header alone. Just the header will be designed and then developed, right? Only that header will be tested, right? And only that header will be deployed and then go through maintenance. And that is iteration 1, right? Iteration 1 has completed, right? Then we'll go over to the second iteration. And when you are going to the second iteration, you are incrementing, right? You are incrementing. So yeah, we've not gotten to this one. So that is it. That is iteration 1. So then again, when that header must have been completed, right? Then we'll now go to the business analyst will now say, oh, we want to work on the footer, which is maybe that logo would have taken 2 weeks, which is sprint 1, right? Then we'll now go to the sprint 2, right? The business analyst will say, okay, in this sprint 2, we want to work on the footer. The business analyst will go back again and then gather all the requirements for the footer. The footer will go through design, the footer will go through development, the footer will go through testing, the footer will be deployed, go through deploy and maintenance. Iteration 2, you are now iterating. First iteration, the first one, the second one is the second iteration. And as you are iterating, when you are adding what you have built to the existing one, what are you doing? You are incrementing. I'm not sure if this is making sense. As you are iterating, what you are building is increasing and you are incremental, right? You are increasing what you are building. That is why it is called iterative. You iterate and then you increment. Iterative incremental model. That is the agile. So when we start working from next week, you will see when we start building the website, you will see we could start from the header, right? We'll do the header, it will be developed, it will be tested, it will be deployed, then we'll go over to the second stage, right? That is what the V model is, the agile iterative incremental model is. But when you now talk about the the view model and the waterfall. It doesn't follow any iteration. The waterfall will ensure that the requirement phase is completed. Everything, the footer, the header, the body, the banner, every pages, all the phases on the website or the application, all the interface, everything is built, right? So this is what this one is. So like I said, the process is repeated until the entire product development is completed, right? The repetition of these phases is called iteration, right? Like I said here, when you go from here to this one, once you have done this first one, the header has gone through all these phases, right? That is one iteration. So when you now repeat this phase again on another feature, let's say the footer, it calls it iteration 2. You now go again, right, and do the banner, it's called iteration 3. You now go again and do the registration form, it calls iteration 3. You now go again and do the product page, iteration 4. You go again and do the checkout, iteration 5. You go again and do the payment section, iteration 6. It goes on and on and on and on and on until everything is completed, right? Like I said, the repetition of the process is called iteration, right? And then for every completed iteration, a product increment, right? So at every repetition of this completion of this iteration, a product increment is delivered. That's what it is. So the product keep increasing. So that's once that iteration is completed, right? So whatever the product we have built, right, we'll add it to what we have already, right? And we'll keep increasing it and we'll keep increasing it until we'll have every software, every part of that software and every feature delivered. Does this make sense? Is it understood? Any question at this point? Any question at this point?
No, I don't have any question.
Okay, so I would assume that it's understood. So yeah, look at some more, because will be a lot of companies adapting, because obviously, a lot of companies are building very complicated and sophisticated websites. So they tend to adopt the agile process, which is the iterative incremental model, right? Which we'll be doing here. So just to add your understanding as well, you can see first iteration, right? The product goes through. So let me ensure that this is what we're talking about. So the product go through, so it goes through define, right? Define is, so this diagram sort of, mix it up. But so it goes through define, which is the requirement analysis. It goes through planning. So it goes to go through development, then through testing, and then it get deployed, accepted, reviewed, and then it goes another increment. So we'll go through a define, plan, should be development, test, acceptance, and then it goes through. So once it has gone through all this phase, right, you have iterated around, and then you are incrementing, right? So after one iteration comes an increment. After another iteration comes an increment. After another iteration comes an increment. Does this make sense? So we'll have a look at another diagram. So you can see that same, we have the plan. Yeah, this one is more of a better one. We have the plan, we have the design, right? It goes through development, it goes through testing, deploy, review, which is the maintenance, right? And then a launch. Then it goes again. So this is how it gets incremented. At every cycle is iteration, right? So that what most organization does is one of these cycles, they call it sprints, right? So when you must have sprints, when you must have sprints across, let me go back. So when you must have sprints across, so it's in that sprint, you have the planning, you have, the design, you have the build, you have the testing, the deployment, the review, and then you launch, and then you go again until you keep iterating and incrementing until every part of that software is completed, right? So now we'll go to the advantage and disadvantage. Right, we'll go to the advantage and disadvantage. So advantage and disadvantage of incremental. When we mention the waterfall, we'll discuss the advantage and disadvantage. We did the view model, we mentioned the advantage and disadvantage, and then we want to talk about the advantage and disadvantage of iterative incremental model. So the first one, which is the advantage, is flexibility. It is very flexible, right? Because you are picking a very small part of their website that you're going through a sprint or through a cycle or through an iteration, right? If anything happens, right, you can easily change it. Let's say you are going through iteration, right? And then the owner says, oh yeah, I don't like that particular one you are working, right? So it only takes 2 weeks, right? If your company is practicing 2 weekly sprints, you only take that 2 weeks to go through that sprint, right? And then adapt to the changes that the the owner wants, right? It's very flexible. Early delivery of value, right? Because it goes through the first, sprint, that little one that you've built will be deployed, right? It ensures that let's say the owner wants certain area of the website to go live. That's why if you visit some of the website, you see some of the features are not yet fully developed. Some are developed, some are not developed, right? It doesn't mean that it was a mistake. It means that they are going through a cycle, right? And they feel like the very important ones, right, are okay to go live. So it ensures that there's early delivery of value, right? It mitigates risk, right? It mitigates risk because you are not risking building everything. And at the end of the day, the owner will say, no, I don't like it. You are taking a very small chunk, right? And then it helps with continuous improvement. So when you must have gone through the first cycle and you're practicing Agile Scrum, you have a meeting, you discuss what has gone well, you've discussed, what has not gone well and ways to improve, right? So after that one, let's say the developers are not writing the code, very well, or the requirement is not clear enough, right? Then during that meeting, you can now go back and tell the developer, the BA, please try and break the requirement into smaller chunks so that it could be easier to understand and digest, right? So they would do that in the next sprint. So it's great room for improvement, right? Then it has a disadvantage, and its disadvantage is complexity. So as you know, like I've just mentioned, it's a bit complex because you are breaking down, those web's features and functionality into smaller units, and you're going through a cycle, and then you come back again, go through a cycle. So it can be very complex, to deal with, but that is one that is more efficient, and then it is resources intensive, right? Because you need your BA to be there, you need, your designer, you need your developers, your testers, and then they will be working at every sprint. But let's say you are practicing Agile, let's say you want to build a very small website and you want to use vModel. You can bring in someone, a BA on a contract base, and give him few months to gather all the requirements. And when that person is done, you can say, oh yeah, thank you, we don't need you again, right? Because all the requirements will go to the design phase. You can hire a designer. Once the designer is done, you say, thank you, we don't need you again, right? So you just employ, finish, you dismiss. But with Agile, right, which is a iterative incremental model, you need them because they go through the sprint, after which they start over again, So it's more resource intensive, right? So yes, that is it for this one. So I want to recap because we are moving into software testing lifecycle. So I'll recap just to refresh our mind around SDLC. We've mentioned what SDLC means, right? We've mentioned the significance of it, and we've gone into the phases, right? I'm sure you can remember the phase, which is the requirement, right? The design, the build, right? The testing, then the deployment, as well as maintenance. So we've gone through different models, and then we've gone through the advantage and disadvantage. So that will now enable us to step into the next session, which is the software testing lifecycle. So we have a testing lifecycle as well. So in as much as we'll come into software development lifecycle, we also have our software testing lifecycle. And it's important you know this lifecycle because most often, can you tell us what SDLC and STLC is, right? Tell us the SDLC, you give them what SDLC is, and you give them what STLC is, right? So, so before we go into, so the SDLC, as you can see, it has its own, right, phases, right? So we have the requirements phase, the requirement analysis phase, right? Like I said, you do your requirement analysis, you analyze it, you test, you create your test plan, right? You plan your test basically, right? The next one is that you create your design, your test design, your environment setup, test execution, and then test closure. Yesterday we talked about test closure as well. So, but before we go into more this software development lifecycle is in great detail. So let's look at what software testing software testing lifecycle is, right? So software testing lifecycle outlines a structured approach that involves software testers in planning, designing, executing, and maintaining testing activities throughout the software development lifecycle, right? I've mentioned the phases as well. So it involves planning, testing, planning, designing, executing, and managing test activity, right? So hence why we'll have this diagram, as you can see. As you can see, we'll have number one is the requirements analysis, where you analyze, let's say we are working on Agile, right? And then those requirements during the sprint, you are committing solely into the sprint. The BA is reading out the stories, right? So once you start practicing, because you're going to practice this, once you start practicing it, you begin to make sense. And how do you practice this, right? On Monday, when we'll be committing our stories into sprint, BA will be reading out these requirements. GA will be reading out requirements, and you will be asking questions. You'll be saying, why? Well, what in the acceptance criteria you said we should have so functionality, right? But you didn't mention the fields, right? So you'll be asking the question that way. That is where you are analyzing it, ensuring that the acceptance criteria makes sense, right? Once the acceptance criteria has made sense, the developer will go off and start building it. Right, it's been committed into sprint, developers start building it. You don't just sit, right? Like I said before, you create your task and then you start writing your test case, right? You start writing your test case. But before you start writing your test case, you need to say, oh, okay, how am I, if you're working in a light team, how am I actually going to test this, right? You will need to check, okay, are you going to do manual testing? Are you going to do automated testing, right? So this is when you are planning, what are the kind of testing that I have to do here? Right? Am I doing functional testing? Am I doing non-functional testing? Is it performance testing? What are the kind of tests? What are the kind of data I will need for this testing? What are the environment that I will need? You are planning it. Who are those involved in this testing? What are my exit criteria? What are my entry criteria? What are my definition of done? What are my definition of ready? So this is when you are planning your test. What are the scope involved? I mentioned this briefly yesterday, right? This is when you are planning your test. You are planning how you will do it. Who are my team? Who is doing what? You are planning you are planning your test, which is not otherwise test planning. So after that, when you must have known all these things, that is when you start designing your test. And how do you design your test? You design your test by writing your test cases, your test scenarios, preparing your test scripts. If it's automated test, you can start writing your feature file. If it is manual testing, you start writing your test cases and your test scenarios, right? So after that, that is when you now go to the next stage and set up your environment. You set up your environment, right? So if it's automated test, you create your automated test script, right? You must have asked for your testing environment, right? So all of you will be setting up your automation test framework from scratch, right? So you're setting up your environment. So after setting up your environment, before you must have done all these things, the developer must have finished, right? Once the developer has finished, what do? You will now start executing your tests. That is the phase where you start executing your test, right? Of course, during the executing of your test, you will catch bugs, you will report bugs, you will find defects, right? Some error, you will find all of it. You will report it, you will retest it, you will do regression testing, right? And after that, when everything must have passed, it has met your, definition of done. That is when you will now close your test. And during test closure, it has its own other activities, right, that you are meant to work on or you're meant to do. So we'll come into all of this in great detail. So we'll go to stages. Obviously, I've gone through the stages with you, and we'll just go through it again quickly. So the first stage is a requirement analysis stage. I've told you what action you perform on this stage. So the next stage is test planning. I've explained what we're doing here, and then the next one is test case development. Like I said, this is where you start developing your test case. So the next one is environment setup. You start setting up your environment. The next one, you execute your test when the developer must have finished, and then test cycle closure. So you close your test cycle, right? So we'll take all these things one after the other. We'll come back to it and we'll take them one after the other. All right. So now, and then we'll look at the activities, that you perform, which I have, gone through, and then you look at your deliverables. So let's go into it in more details, right? So Yes, so the first one is the requirements analysis, right? The requirements analysis is the first stage, and we'll be looking at the activity, right? So the activity includes identifying the type of testing requires, right? You gather details about testing priority and then the main focus. You identify test environment, right? During this stage. Then what are the deliverables? The deliverables are requirement traceability matrix, which is a document that establishes a clear mapping between requirements and test case, right? These are where you are analyzing the requirement, right? What is required, right? You're also looking at the test objective and scope documents, right? Some organization must have will have scope documents. Some organization wouldn't have it, but sometimes you include it in your test plan documents as well, right? You look at all this. So these are your deliverables. Most organization will already have it as well. So you wouldn't bother, you just read through it. And then some organization doesn't have it. You just have your test plan to do, right? So we'll go into the next stage. So because I've explained it, we'll just be quick about it. So we'll go into the next stage, which is test planning, right? So this is where the overall test strategy and approach, I've mentioned this before, right? For software projects are defined. You define, the strategy, the approach on how you do your testing, right? So this involves creating a comprehensive plan that aligns the scopes, right? I mentioned this yesterday about test planning. You define the scope, you define the objective, the resources, the schedule, when the test will be executed, and then you also discuss your deliverables, right? What you are going to achieve at the end of it, right? So this is what the test planning is, and then you're looking at your activity. So your activity involves developing a comprehensive test plan. Like I mentioned yesterday, you all will be developing this test plan, right, for the project you'll be doing. You will develop a test plan documentation, and the test plan documentation will include, your objective, your scopes, your approach, how you want to go about it, the resources, the schedule, and the deliverables, right? We'll go into that in great details by the time after we've gone through it. Then you can now start working on your test plan, right? Another activity is to identify test tool and infrastructure required, right? So you identify the test tool, you look at where you'll be, what tool you will use to manage your test. So in this case, you'll be using Azure DevOps, right? You'll be using for automation, you'll be using Selenium, you'll be using C# as your programming language, you'll be using SpecFlow. So you will also look at what browser or which browser you want to run your test on, right? You might want to run it on Chrome, you might want to run it on, Firefox, you might want to run it on different other browsers, right? So this is what you'll be looking at during your test plan. And what are the deliverables? Test plan documentation. I've mentioned this over and over again. You will do your test plan, right? So, and at the end of the day, you produce a test plan documentation, and it is a comprehensive document that outlines the test strategy, objective, scope, schedule, resources, and other relevant details, such as your exit criteria, your entry criteria, who are involved, and so on and so forth. What environment you need, what browser, what other tools you'll be needing, like your laptop, your hardwares, the softwares you'll be needing to run your test. So these are where all these things comes in, right? You outline it under your test plan documentation or on your test plan documentation. So after that, we'll go over to the next stage or the next phase, which is test case development. Test case development. So this is where the testing team or you as a tester create your detailed test case based on the requirement. Don't forget, creating your test case based on the requirements, right? Obviously, as you know, the requirement is done earlier, right? Before even the design phase and other things when you are considering the development life cycle, right? So you write your test case based on the requirements, right? You're writing it based on the acceptance criteria and the user stories, right? Then what are the activity? The activity, you look at the requirements, right? You review it, you make sure it makes sense, right? Like I've mentioned before, you design your test case, right? And also you write your automation test scripts. So in this case, because the development work is not done or might not be done at the moment, right? For your automation, you write your feature file. Don't worry, when we get into automation, you understand what I mean by feature file. You do your step definition, right? And get it ready. So once the development work is done, you go in and then this is for web testing, right? You go in and then inspect your element, infuse, put it into your test, and then you run your test. It pass. Very easy, right? So for your test, manual testing, you already written your test case based on the acceptance criteria, which is the requirements, right? So once the development work is done, you just go ahead and execute your manual test script. Go into the website, ensure that that what is specified on the requirements is what is on there, and then you go ahead and execute it. right? So what are the deliverables here? We have test case documentation, which is a comprehensive document containing the detailed test case for various scenarios. So sometimes, some organization will want you to have this in an Excel sheet, but some organization, have other tools, right? Like in Jira, you have your Sapphire Scale, Sapphire Squad. You have other tools in Azure DevOps, which we'll be using. We'll have the Azure DevOps test plan, right? You have functionalities where you design your test case and even store it in a test suite, right? So you'll be doing all those things. And then the next one is environment setup. I've mentioned this area earlier, right? You'll prepare your environment and the infrastructure for testing. Right, the activity is set up your environment that replicate the production environment. You must replicate the production environment, but what it means is that you build your environment where you'll be testing. So you have your test URL or your test sites, right? And whatever they do in production, they will deploy it to your test environment where you will go and test it. The second one, you install and configure necessary hardwares and softwares and tools for testing. Like I said, for the automated test, you'll be installing your Visual Studio, which is your IDE, the IDE integrated development environment. That is where you'll be doing your testing. You install your integrate your spec flow, your Selenium and all the dependencies, right, that you will need, right, and packages. We call it NuGet packages. So you install that. You will ensure that your test data, such as your test URL, obviously your test URL will be given to you, your test login details. Let's say you are testing, you're a tester. If you want to log in, right, you need to have your test login detail, right? So you make sure that they are ready for you to start testing. And what are the deliverables? It's very simple. Test environment. You ensure that test environment is ready, right? So we can go to the next slide, which is the test execution. So when you must have written you've obviously planned your test, you've written your test cases, you set up your environment, you are now waiting for the developer to finish. As soon as the developer finishes, what you start doing is you start executing your tests. Right, this is when you start executing your test case. Those test cases you've written, you start executing it. Right, going, performing the test, reporting any bug, reporting any defects, back to the developer, they will fix it, you will test it again. And what are the activities? Execute test cases based on the test plan, record your test result. You must record your test result. Whether it passes or not, you must record it. You must take the screenshots, right? You must take the screenshot. If it passes, you take the screenshot. If it doesn't pass, you also take the screenshot, you also report it, right? You attach it to the story, right? You will do all those things. You see how you take screenshots, you see how you record it. You log defects, right? Whenever you see anything that is not as expected, you have to log it. You create a bug. We'll also show you how to do that. They are quite simple and easy to follow and perform, right? So after that, what you do, after reporting your bug, that is your test execution, right? So then what are the deliverables? The deliverables, which is what you will show at the end, is your test execution results, right? So when you must have run your test, and Azure DevOps, you have where your test plan is. You can have it in form of a bar chart or a pie chart. That is where you show your results, right? And then you also show the bug you've reported, how many bugs you've raised, how many tests has passed, how many has failed. You have all this because sometimes the stakeholder will ask you, "Oh, can I see your test execution result?" You have to show it. "Can I see how many bugs you've raised?" You have to show it, right? So after that, the next one, which is the last one, last but not the least, is the test closure, right? So the test closure includes the testing activity, concluding the testing activity. That is when everything about testing, you are concluding it, you consolidate the results, you check your assessment, you make sure that every process, all your documentation are generated, you look at the lesson that you've learned, the mistakes that you've made, you look at all these things. So you are considering this at this time, you are no longer testing, right? You are no longer testing. But most often, when you are working there, in as much as we have the test closure and all those things as part of the software development lifecycle, but don't get it wrong. When you employ as a tester in a company that is not it's not like you are a contractor. So if you are a contractor and you've been hired to work on a project, so at the end of the day, when you must have finished, you do the test closure, you gather you consolidate on your result, the lesson learned, document everything, and send it to the company, right? But when you are employed as a tester, right, in an organization that is full-time, testing continues. So the moment you're jumping, you're finishing this one, you're going into another one, you're going into another one, you just keep testing and testing and testing and testing. And sometimes your company, what you could be doing is enhancing already existing softwares and applications, right? So you don't necessarily do this, but it's important you know, because if you're working in or your company is a software consult or testing company, right? So the test other company's product. So at the end of the day, they do the test closure, they close, they go into another project. So just know the difference, and so you don't confuse or complicate the issue. So what are the deliverables? Deliverables is the test, closure report, the final test result, and metrics and statistics. Right, the metrics and statistics, which include how many tests was executed, how many test cases that was written, how many tests passed, how many failed, how many bugs has been created, and every other things that will be involved in that statistics. Right. So now that is it for the test life cycle, the phases of test cycle, which is the SDLC. Right. So now the next one is that we'll go into relationship between SDLC and STLC. Don't forget, we'll mention SDLC and we'll mention STLC. We've gone through all their phases, right? We've seen how they are intertwined, how they are related to each other, right? So we want to look at the relationship between them. So SDLC are intertwined, I mentioned that, right? So with SDLC, yeah, it provides a border framework for software development, right? So the SDLC covers just the software development lifecycle, software development process or different phase that has to do with software development, right? But the STLC concentrates only on the testing aspect of things within this same framework, right? So, you know, in the STLC, you have the testing phase, right? But in the SDLC, you do not have development phase. But inside that testing phase in the STLC, in the SDLC, you now have your own STLC where you also go through your own phases to ensure that that software is properly tested, right? So know that the success of software project depends on effective integration and collaboration between the two software life two cycles to deliver a high quality product. So it depends solely on these two. It's not just one, because when you build it without proper testing, right? When you build it without proper testing, the software will not meet mostly, or most often will not meet requirement, the specification, right? Or the user's need, and the user wouldn't be satisfied. But when it has gone through the software development lifecycle, and during the testing phase, it has gone through software testing lifecycle as well. When you get deployed, it meets customers' needs, and the customer will be satisfied at the end of the day, right? So that is where we'll draw the line for today. So we'll open up the floor for questions. I know we've gone through quite a lot, so please feel free to ask questions. Feel free to call me back. Feel free to ask me that you don't think you understand this phase. Could you please come again, explain what you mean here, right? It's your time now. Question and answer.
Yeah, I have a question
Yes.
regarding this last explanation. Now, can
Okay.
you please can you put it back? Let me see from the screen.
Yes, please.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, you just mentioned about the relationship, but I still don't capture exactly the relationship between the SDLC and the STLC. What you explained. So
okay.
please, can you go back to it again? Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So the relationship that I meant is that they are intertwined, right? So how do I mean by they are intertwined? The SDLC and the SDLC. So in the SDLC, right, you have the testing, right? Recall that we'll have the requirement gathering, right? We'll have the design, we'll have the development, we'll have the testing, right? So inside that testing, right, before when the tester is testing it, the tester will not go through STLC, right, during that testing. So SDLC covers everything around software development, including testing. But STLC focuses only on the testing part of things. And that testing part of things is inside SDLC. Does that make sense now? Or should I come again?
Yeah, I am understanding what you're saying now. I think I understand what you're saying.
All right. Okay. Any other question? Does anyone have any other question? This is your time to ask question. Ask question if there's anything you do not understand.
Why the iterative model? Why do you prefer that? I mean, is obviously, and just in terms of also thank you, because I also know that there will be I presume that there will be like budget for software testers. So with your decision on model also depend on your budgets, or like, are there any other criteria,
Yeah, so that's a very good question, right? So now the decision of choosing a particular model depends on the budget. It depends on the complexity of the project, right? It depends on the kind of project or the kind of software, the complexity of the software, right? And who are involved.
Yeah.
And how effective do you want the process to be, right? So now, as you know, the waterfall is not good for, or is not efficient for a very large project, right? It's good for very small software development projects, right? So that automatically tells you that it's not robust enough, right, to handle a very large software development process, right? So which one, why is it not robust enough? Because it's difficult to accommodate and handle changes. And we as human beings, most often we're indecisive, especially if you're a business owner, right? Sometimes you can just wake up and say, oh, I want this to be done differently, right? So which of these, and of course, change is constant, right? We usually change in our opinion or our view on things. And once a stakeholder has changed anything and the development team are using waterfall, it would automatically means that changes must have to wait until everything is done, right? But the agile method, once you say, oh, we don't need this thing, right? What do the BA do? The BA or the PO will say, okay, what do you need then? They will now note it down and they will put it in the backlog. When that particular sprint has finished, they will bring in that one and still rebuild it for you. And even sometimes when the team have capacity, they don't have much stories they are working on. They could do sprint refinement, and within the middle of the sprint, they can pull in more stories. And right, it's iterative, right? It handles all the large project is broken into smaller units. It's easier to handle. It can handle changes, right? So that is why almost all the company, almost all the organization are adopting to agile way of doing things.
Okay. Thank you for that agile explanation.
You're welcome. Blessing, we're calling you, but it seems you're having network issue. Do you have any question? I know some of the things that we mentioned today, some of them must have heard it yesterday, and you were not here yesterday. So is there anything you want us to go over again? Is there anything you don't understand? Do you have any question? I told the team that if you don't have question, then I will start asking questions.
No, but I just want more explanation about the software testing. Under the software testing, the requirements analysis and the test planning, those two aspects. I don't think I was following this in the explanation then. If you can help me go through those two slides.
Okay, so the requirement analysis, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so now on the requirement, you said the requirement analysis and the test plan, is it?
Yeah, the test plan. Yeah, test plan.
Yes. So now, as you can see, the requirement analysis stage, right, is where we look at the requirements, right? All the requirement that we need, which includes, the requirement documentation the BA has written, everything that is involved, that will be involved in the project. We'll look at the environment, we'll analyze everything, because your environment is a requirement. You need it to test. Your hardwares are requirements. You need it to test. All your documentations, your test data, everything that you need to test falls under this requirements analysis, which includes the requirement that the BA must have gotten. So everything that has to do with requirement, this is where you analyze it. This is where you say, okay, what are the things? So most organizations, what they usually use to do this requirements and analysis is what is called RTM, requirement traceability metrics, right? So it is a documentation that you can use to map out all the things you will need, the environment, the requirements, your test cases, everything. So this is the first thing you do to ensure that anything I will need for this testing has been considered and thought through. Right? So these are the things you need. So that is why if you look at the activity, you say you identify the type of testing required, right? Because you've seen the requirements, you've seen what you are trying to do. So what do? You now say, oh, so with this particular one, I will be doing manual and automated testing, right? This is part of analyzing that requirement and saying that, yeah, this is what I will do, right? You are looking at the priority. You're asking the BA, what is the priority for this testing, for this particular, feature? Are we looking at, testing it first? Is it high priority? Is it low priority? So I've been in a situation where I'm testing a particular feature that has low priority, right? So, and then another one that has high priority came. I have to drop that low priority and then start testing the high priority one. So this is where you will now say, what are the priorities, right? Of all the features or all the stories that are going into the sprint, right? It's during this analysis that you do that. You will now say, what are the environments I'm using? So it's basically the first thing you talk through or the first thing you start putting down, right? Before you actually start doing your test planning. Because most of the information you must have documented here will help you organize your test plan very well, because that is the next stage you are going into, right? So when you must have gone into the next stage, which is test planning, right? So this is where you develop your test plan documentation, right? Your test strategy, your approach, right? That you will use to actually start testing it. It's a documentation. Don't worry about it. You will write your test plan documentation, and when we must have gone through the test plan documentation, you will not understand that. Okay, this was actually what I was talking about, right? So, like I was saying, that the test plan documentation will include, that is where you will now include and consider the scope, right? The objective, the resources, the schedule, the deliverables, right? Why doing this? And then the activity, like I said, you develop a comprehensive test plan, right? You identify testing tools, right? And you identify the environment, right? So during analysis stage, you are considering all this thing and say which one best suits what we are doing. Then after you have analyzed it, which is on this stage, you are now saying which one, which is on this stage, right? On the stage of requirements analysis, we are analyzing all the requirements. When you must have analyzed, you have identified it. So on this stage now, this is where you will now start saying yes. You start documenting it. You've known what you want. You are now documenting everything. So after you must have documented it, right? You've known your scope. You've known the approach you will take. You've known the strategy you will take. You will know that you are doing automated testing. You are doing functional testing. You're going to be doing performance testing, right? You've known it. That is when you now start developing your test case, right? So after development of your test case, what happens next? You set up your environment. You've already known what tools that you will use for your environment. It's just to start downloading it, right? Because you've considered that during the requirement and you've documented it on your test plan, right? So after that, you now start executing your test when it must have been developed, right? And after the testing, what do you do next? You close your test. Does that make sense, person?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other question?
Yeah, Bona, thank you very much. Yeah, you said after testing,
Yeah,
and the deployment,
yeah,
after testing and this thing has been deployed to the owner
yeah,
or to the customer.
yeah,
So then the maintenance bit of it,
yeah.
who will be doing the maintenance?
Okay, very good question. This is a very good question. Very nice question. So now, right, some organization, very big companies, right, they have their in-house IT team, right? So once all this thing has gone through these processes, right, and it's been deployed, right, users are using it. Like, let's say like Amazon, right? They have their own IT team. They have their own testers. They have their own development. It's been deployed. End users are using it, which include I and you. We are shopping on Amazon, right? Then new products are coming up all the time, right? Some of the old ones that are out of stock they need to put the display out of stock or remove it from the product page, right? Which people are doing that? The maintenance team. Same people that does it, but they will not go into maintenance and enhancing it, right? That is the first one. When the company have their own IT team that includes the developers, the testers, of which most of company have, right? Then, but when it is a small company, right, that's contract their software development job out, right? So those company would, let me say, medium company now. I want to consider medium company before the small company. So the medium company, most often they do not have testers, right? They do not have testers, so they contract their software development process to other or project to other software development consulting company, right? So this software development consulting company will develop the website, following all these different phases and these different phases of testing, right? When they must have done it, they will now send everything to the company that owns it, right? So what some of this company does is they will now say, okay, now you've built it. We want you to be maintaining it for us. Let's say every 2 weeks or at ad hoc, right? Whenever they need maintenance, they call them, please, we want you to maintain this website for us, right? I know so many of us must have developed our website before, right? So sometimes when that development software has been developed, right, you are using it. When you need something to be removed from that software, what do? You call the person that designed it, right? You call the person will now say, oh, okay, you want me to remove that, and the person will remove it. But when what we are talking about is not just softwares that maybe few people use. Sometimes you have like software like the UK Gov website, right? It's a very complex. You talk about the website that the Ministry of Defense used. You talk about the website like Amazon, like eBay, like all these top, like the British Airways company. A lot of people are websites. All these top websites. A lot of people use it. So they have development team in-house that does that maintenance, right? Does that answer your question? Oops, I will back. Okay, are you still with me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Any other question?
Thank you.
Any other question?